My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired pediatric nurse. The howling of the hurricane sirens was deafening, but it was nothing compared to the agonizing sound of the locks clicking shut on my own son's vehicle. The dark floodwaters were already creeping over the porch steps when my daughter-in-law Valerie looked me dead in the eye, tossed her expensive designer bags into the very last empty seat, and slammed the heavy door right in my face. They were speeding away to leave me behind in the rising tide, but as they drove off, dreaming of my estate, they had absolutely no idea whose name was actually on the deed. The rain lashed against my face as I stood trapped on the porch, leaning heavily on my metal cane. I was only 3 weeks out from a knee replacement surgery, leaving my mobility painfully slow and awkward. I slammed my free hand against the cold, tinted window of the car, begging Marcus, the boy I had raised with every ounce of my soul, to roll it down and help me inside me. He would not even turn his head to look at me. Valerie simply checked her makeup in the passenger side mirror, completely ignoring the terrifying reality that the sky was black with the raging storm, and I was standing helpless in the wind. The engine roared to life, completely drowning out my desperate cries for help. I watched in absolute paralyzing disbelief as the red taillights of their car vanished down the flooded driveway, cutting through the rapidly rising water to reach the main road. The chilling realization hit me harder than the gale-force winds ripping through the oak trees. They were not coming back for me. My own flesh and blood had decided that my life was less valuable than Valerie's luggage. The icy water was now seeping under the front door, soaking into the beautiful hardwood floors I had worked double shifts at the hospital for 40 years to pay off. A cold, heavy knot of pure terror formed deep in my chest as the water rushed over my bare feet. I was entirely alone, trapped in a house that was quickly becoming a watery grave, abandoned to die by the two people who were supposed to care for me the most. As I dragged my aching body back inside and locked the heavy wooden door against the rising storm, the memories of how I built this life flashed before my eyes. This sprawling coastal house was not just a piece of real estate. It was the physical manifestation of my entire existence and every hardship I had ever endured. When my husband passed away 30 years ago, he left me with a mountain of grief and a beautiful baby boy to raise all on my own. I promised myself right then and there that Marcus would never feel the sting of poverty or the burden of struggle. I spent decades working exhausting double shifts in the pediatric ward, holding the hands of sick children, while my own son was at home with babysitters. Every single extra dollar I earned went straight into this property. I skipped vacations. I wore second-hand scrubs, and I drove a beat-up sedan until the wheels practically fell off. I did it all so Marcus could attend a top-tier university and graduate completely free of student loans. I sacrificed my youth and my personal comfort to ensure his future was perfectly secure, and I paid off every single penny of the mortgage on this beautiful home. It sits on a prime double lot overlooking the ocean, making it worth an absolute fortune in today's housing market. But to me, its true value was never about the money or the prestige. Every room holds the precious echoes of my life. The wooden doorway where I tracked Marcus growing taller year by year, the spacious kitchen where I baked his birthday cakes from scratch, and the front porch where I drank my morning coffee in peace. It was my sanctuary built on a foundation of pure maternal love and relentless hard work. But that sanctuary began to crumble the moment Marcus married Valerie 5 years ago. I wanted to love her. I truly tried to welcome her into our family with open arms. But Valerie possessed a cold, calculating spirit that sent shivers down my spine from day one. She grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth and expected the world to bow at her feet. Her entitlement was suffocating. At first, it was just subtle microaggressions. She would wrinkle her nose at my vintage furniture and make backhanded compliments about how quaint my lifestyle was. But soon, her obsession with wealth took center stage. Whenever they came over for Sunday dinner, I would catch Valerie pacing through my home, literally measuring the rooms with a tape measure she kept in her designer purse. She would stand in the middle of my living room and loudly discuss the extensive renovations they would make to the property one day, speaking as if I were already in my grave. She openly criticized my taste and called my beloved home a tear-down project with good land value. Worse than her disrespect for my home was the way she slowly poisoned my relationship with Marcus. She manipulated him with masterful precision. If I called him just to hear his voice, she would sigh heavily in the background and complain that I was being needy. She convinced him that my occasional requests for help with heavy groceries or minor home repairs were unreasonable demands tying him down. Over the years, I watched the sweet, caring boy I raised transform into a distant, irritated stranger who treated me like a frustrating chore. Valerie systematically chipped away at the bond between mother and son, convincing Marcus that my existence was nothing more than a heavy burden delaying his inevitable inheritance. She wanted the life I had built, but she did not want me in it. And as the storm waters raged outside my windows, I finally understood just how far she was willing to go to get it. I refused to simply lay down and die for them. The dirty floodwater breached the front door, pouring into the foyer with terrifying force. My bad knee screamed in agonizing pain with every step, but pure adrenaline pushed me forward. I grabbed a flashlight and a bottle of water from the kitchen counter before the rising tide could sweep them away. The main staircase felt like an insurmountable mountain, but I dragged my aching body up as the dark, muddy water swallowed the stairs right behind me. I reached the second-floor landing, but the storm surge was relentless. I knew I had to get higher if I wanted to survive. I pulled the release cord for the drop-down attic stairs and climbed into the suffocating darkness just as the second floor began to take on water. I sat on the hard wooden beams of the attic for 14 terrifying hours. The hurricane winds tore violently at the roof tiles, sounding exactly like a runaway freight train passing directly overhead. I prayed through the long night, shivering in the damp cold, refusing to let my life story end as a tragic footnote to their selfish greed. As dawn broke, the violent storm finally passed. I heard the steady rumble of an outboard motor. I pushed open the attic vent window and waved my flashlight wildly into the morning light. It was my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, navigating a small aluminum boat through what used to be our street. He pulled me aboard, wrapping a warm blanket around my trembling shoulders. I stayed at a local emergency shelter, deliberately keeping my name off the survivor registry. A full week later, the brutal floodwaters receded, leaving behind a thick layer of foul-smelling mud and unimaginable destruction. I borrowed Mr. Henderson's truck and drove back to my property before Marcus and Valerie even knew the roads were cleared. I needed to see the damage for myself before I faced them. The first floor was completely devastated. My hardwood floors were permanently warped and caked in sludge. Dark water lines stained the painted walls high above the door frames. The smell of rot hung heavy in the air. I waded slowly through the debris of my shattered life, my heart aching for the precious family memories that had been violently washed away. But as I pushed open the swollen wooden door to the guest bedroom that Marcus and Valerie used, my deep sorrow was about to be violently replaced by something entirely different. I began carefully sifting through the wreckage in their room, hoping to salvage any family photographs that might have miraculously survived the surge. I reached deep into the top drawer of the heavy oak nightstand, which had stayed just inches above the worst of the destructive flood line. My fingers brushed against cold metal and smooth glass. I pulled out Valerie's expensive backup tablet. The protective leather case was damp and ruined, but the electronic device itself felt remarkably dry. I pressed the power button, not expecting a single thing to happen after a week in a flooded house. To my absolute astonishment, the screen flickered to bright life, illuminating the dark, muddy shadows of the ruined room. Valerie had left it plugged into a massive portable power bank, which kept the battery charged before shorting out. I swiped the glass screen to unlock the device. She was so arrogant, she never bothered changing her passcode from her birth year. The home screen opened directly to her primary messaging application. My eyes instantly locked onto a recent text thread, with a contact listed as a prominent local real estate agent. The digital timestamps were from the very morning of the hurricane, sent just minutes after they abandoned me on the porch to drown. I felt the warm blood freeze solid in my veins as I read her exact words. Valerie had typed, "Do not worry about the old lady, the storm will take care of the problem for us." She went on to confidently say, "We will list the vacant double lot by next month and collect the massive flood insurance payout on the ruined structure." My hands began to shake uncontrollably as I scrolled further down the screen, desperately praying to God that my own son had defended me. Instead, I saw a brutal message sent from Marcus in a private group chat with Valerie just moments later. He actually wrote, a private nursing home was going to be way too expensive anyway, so nature taking its course is honestly much easier for everyone involved. He casually called me a massive financial burden. He actively agreed to let me drown alone so he could cash an insurance check. The raw pain that ripped through my chest was sharper than a physical blade. I dropped heavily onto the ruined guest mattress, gasping for air as hot tears streamed down my wrinkled face. I had sacrificed my entire life to give that boy the absolute world, and he had casually priced my life against a property insurance policy. For several long minutes, I let the profound heartbreak wash over me. I openly mourned the sweet son I thought I had raised. But then, as I stared at the glowing screen, proving their premeditated cruelty, the hot tears suddenly stopped. The crushing weight of their ultimate betrayal hardened into something incredibly dense and powerful inside my soul. My paralyzing heartbreak evaporated into the humid air, instantly replaced by a cold, hard, unyielding fury. They genuinely thought they had successfully buried me in the storm. They fully believed they had won the ultimate prize. But I was still breathing. I held the undeniable digital evidence in my hands, and I was about to teach them exactly what happens when you underestimate a fiercely protective mother who suddenly has absolutely nothing left to lose. I slipped the digital tablet securely into my waterproof bag and walked out of that ruined house without looking back. I did not call the police, and I certainly did not call my son. Let them believe the dark floodwaters had swallowed me whole. Let them sleep soundly, thinking they had gotten away with murder. I needed absolute silence to execute my plan. I drove straight to the neighboring county and pulled into the driveway of my late husband's sister, Renee. Renee and I had been thick as thieves for 40 years, and she possessed a fiercely protective spirit that terrified anyone who dared cross her. When she opened her front door and saw me standing there covered in dried mud, she burst into tears of relief. But as we sat at her kitchen table, and I showed her the brutal text messages on that glowing screen. Her tears instantly dried up. I watched the profound horror on her face transform into a righteous, burning anger. She slammed her hand down on the wooden table, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, protective fire. She swore right then and there that she would help me strip them of every single thing they thought they had stolen from me. For the next 3 weeks, I became a silent ghost. I lived quietly in Renee's spare bedroom, while the regional news channels continued to report the tragic casualty numbers from the hurricane. I knew Marcus and Valerie were busy playing the role of the grieving family for their wealthy friends, counting the imaginary millions they thought were coming their way. They had no idea I was sitting just 30 miles away, preparing to completely dismantle their comfortable lives, brick by greedy brick. The very next morning, Renee drove me to the private office of my longtime estate lawyer, Mr. Sterling. When I walked into his boardroom, the poor man looked as though he had seen a literal ghost. He had already started drafting the preliminary probate paperwork, assuming I was gone. I sat down in the leather chair, placed the waterlogged tablet on his polished mahogany desk, and told him everything. I watched his professional composure crack as he read the messages my son had sent. By the time he finished, Mr. Sterling was just as furious as Renee. We immediately got to work. I used the regional disaster declaration to my absolute advantage, pushing emergency paperwork through the stalled county system with rapid speed. My first move was the most crucial. I legally transferred the deed of my coastal property entirely out of my personal name. I placed the double lot and the damaged house into a newly formed irrevocable living trust, and I named Renee as the sole controlling trustee. With one stroke of a pen, the house was completely removed from my estate. It simply did not belong to me anymore, which meant it could never belong to Marcus, but I was not finished. I pulled the file for my massive life insurance policy, the one I had paid into every single month for 30 years, to make sure my son was taken care of. Marcus had been listed as the sole beneficiary since the day he was born. I stared at his printed name on the official document for one brief, painful second before crossing it out with thick black ink. I cancelled the entire policy outright. I took the remaining cash value and legally redirected every last cent to a local children's hospital charity. I systematically drained the deep well of generational wealth they had so desperately tried to drown me for. By the time I walked out of Mr. Sterling's office, my personal estate was worth absolutely nothing. I was a paper pauper, but I felt wealthier and more powerful than I had in my entire life. Every single asset they had plotted to steal was locked away behind an impenetrable wall of ironclad legal documents. I had successfully turned their golden goose to dust, and I did it all while they were busy pricing out luxury cars on my dime. With my finances completely secured and out of their greedy reach, it was finally time to bait the trap. I instructed Mr. Sterling to make the official phone call. He contacted Marcus under the guise of handling my tragic passing. Mr. Sterling used his most somber professional voice, informing my son that the emergency disaster relief agencies had officially cleared my property for entry. He then formally invited Marcus and Valerie to meet him at the ruined house that coming Friday afternoon. He told them it was for a mandatory on-site reading of the estate instructions and to initiate the massive flood insurance disbursement. The trap was set perfectly. Mr. Sterling reported back that Marcus sounded appropriately sad on the phone, but Valerie could be heard cheering excitedly in the background. They eagerly accepted the invitation, practically drooling over the phone at the promise of an immediate payout. They were absolutely convinced they were walking into a massive payday. They thought they were going to stand on the very mud they tried to bury me under and receive the keys to their luxurious new life. They spent the rest of the week preparing to become rich, blissfully unaware that the mother they had discarded was waiting patiently in the shadows. I spent those final days rehearsing exactly what I was going to say, letting the cold fury sharpen my mind. I was no longer the vulnerable, heartbroken old woman crying on a flooded porch. I was the architect of their absolute ruin. I picked out a sharp, tailored suit to wear, refusing to look like a victim. I wanted them to see strength and unyielding power the moment they laid eyes on me. The stage was set, the audience was eagerly arriving, and the final act was about to begin. Friday afternoon arrived with bright sunshine that felt almost mocking against the backdrop of my ruined neighborhood. I stood silently in the shadows of the damaged kitchen, peering through the broken blinds as a gleaming, brand-new luxury sports utility vehicle crunched up the debris-filled driveway. It had temporary dealer plates secured to the bumper. They had actually leased an obscenely expensive vehicle on the foolish assumption that my massive life insurance payout was already safely deposited in their bank account. Marcus stepped out first, wearing a crisp, dark suit, quickly followed by Valerie in an elegant black dress that looked much more suited for a high society gala than a muddy disaster zone. They approached Mr. Sterling, who was waiting patiently on the ruined front porch. I watched in absolute disgust as Valerie pulled a delicate lace handkerchief from her designer purse, dabbing at perfectly dry eyes, while she threw her free arm around my son to play the part of the devastated, grieving daughter-in-law. Marcus kept his head bowed, nodding solemnly as Mr. Sterling spoke, putting on an award-winning performance of the heartbroken child. They looked around at the destroyed property, not with sorrow, but with the poorly hidden hunger of starving vultures eyeing their next easy meal. They practically vibrated with excitement as Mr. Sterling gestured for them to step inside the ruined foyer to begin the formal proceedings. They walked right into my devastated home, expecting to find a gold mine. I waited until they were standing in the very spot where the dark floodwater had first rushed in over my bare feet. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored suit, took a deep, fortifying breath, and stepped out from the shadows of the back hallway into the bright afternoon light pouring through the broken windows. The reaction was instantaneous and deeply satisfying. Valerie let out a shrill, breathless gasp, her expensive designer purse slipping from her trembling fingers and crashing into the foul mud covering the floorboards. Marcus physically stumbled backward, his face draining of all color until he was as pale as a sheet. He looked as though the wooden floor had opened up to swallow him whole. His jaw worked silently, trying desperately to form words that stubbornly refused to come. "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "You both look terribly disappointed to see me breathing today." Valerie began to aggressively stammer frantically, trying to construct a desperate lie about how they tried so hard to come back for me, how the water was just too high and dangerous, and how they had prayed for my safety every single day. I did not say a single word in response. I simply reached into my suit pocket, pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed papers, and handed them directly to my trembling son. It was their entire text message thread, with the real estate agent printed in vivid color. I watched Marcus read his own cruel, calculating words. He realized instantly that I knew exactly how he had priced my life. His pathetic excuses died instantly in his throat. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. Before he could speak a single word of defense, Mr. Sterling stepped forward with his leather briefcase. He looked right at Valerie and spoke with absolute authority. You are not here to inherit this house, nor are you receiving a multi-million-dollar insurance disbursement. You are here to be officially served with eviction papers for the belongings you abandoned inside this property. The color completely drained from Valerie's face as the lawyer handed her the heavy legal documents. I looked my son directly in his wide, panicking eyes and delivered the final, devastating blow. I told him that I had legally transferred the entire estate into an irrevocable trust fully controlled by his Aunt Renee, and that my life insurance policy had been entirely cancelled and given to a children's charity. You get absolutely nothing, I told them, my voice ringing clearly through the empty, ruined house. That ridiculous new car you leased on my dime is going to ruin you financially because there is no massive payout coming to save you from your own greed. Marcus fell to his knees in the dirty mud, finally crying real tears, but they were tears for his own destroyed future and his crushing debt. Valerie began screaming in a hysterical panic, clutching the useless eviction papers as if they would somehow miraculously turn into cash. But their pathetic theatrics were cut abruptly short. At my signal, 2 local county sheriff deputies stepped out from the backyard and firmly informed them that they had exactly 10 minutes to gather what remained of their muddy clothes before they would be arrested and booked for criminal trespassing. I stood on my ruined front porch with Renee by my side as we watched that luxury car slowly drive away, escorted by the flashing lights of the local sheriff cruisers. The incredibly heavy and suffocating weight I had carried for years lifted entirely from my shoulders. The county contractors will eventually rebuild my beautiful coastal home, replacing the damaged hardwood floors and carefully painting the walls. But my life has already been completely cleansed of the absolute worst toxicity imaginable. I finally have true peace in my heart. If surviving the violent hurricane storm and that terrible family betrayal taught me anything, it is a profound lesson I will hold on to for the rest of my days. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. Never let your kindness make you blind to someone's greed. You must always fiercely protect your spirit. Have you ever had to make the painful choice to cut ties with deeply toxic family members just to properly protect your own personal peace and sanity? I would truly love to read about your own experiences, so please take a moment to tell me your brave story down in the comments below. And please, I would also love it if you could let me know exactly which state or beautiful country you are watching from today, and exactly how many minutes you stayed with my story. Your wonderful support means the absolute world to me and helps this entire channel grow. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to Her Golden Years Stories, and hit the notification bell icon so you never miss another heartfelt tale. Until next time, please stay strong, trust your instincts, and forever know your true worth.